Independent investigation. A Catholic university in New Jersey opens a probe into claims of sex abuse in its seminaries. We have new details. World Meeting of Families. A church leader hopes the Holy Father's visit with abuse survivors will be fruitful. ISIS resurfaces. For the first time in nearly a year, an audio recording of the terror group's leader is released. What he says about the American pastor detained in Turkey. And Beating the Odds, a story of hope for a young girl blessed by Pope Francis. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, August 23rd, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Mark Irons, in for Lauren Ashburn. A Catholic university in New Jersey launches an investigation into claims of sex abuse at 2 seminaries. It comes after a report by our partners at Catholic News Agency outlining the allegations, including against Theodore McCarrick. He served as Archbishop of Newark from 1986 to 2000. Correspondent Jason Calvi joins us with more. Jason?
Mark, Seton Hall University has hired a law firm to conduct an independent probe. The university says allegations may have involved seminarians at its college and graduate seminaries. Catholic News Agency, owned by EWTN, interviewed the priests who are making those allegations. The D.C. editor of Catholic News Agency spoke with 7 whistleblowers. 6 priests from the Archdiocese of Newark and 1 religious order priest. Ed Condon agreed not to reveal their names.
There was a specific allegation that we published concerning a rector who was removed from the college seminary, St. Andrews at Seton Hall, in 2014. And the allegation was that this had happened after he was found to have put a hidden camera in a young priest's bedroom. Now, we contacted the Archdiocese. We asked them to comment on the story. We asked them to confirm or deny it. They declined to do so.
One of the priests accuses Newark's former Archbishop Theodore McCarrick of touching seminarians. Cardinal Joseph Tobin, the current Archbishop of Newark, is challenging the report. In a letter to priests in his archdiocese last week, he said, "I would like to believe that the anonymous sources were not, in fact, priests of the archdiocese." Tobin says he has never been told about a, quote, gay subculture. Condon defends his story.
As a journalist, you never want to see anyone question your sources, but at the same time, I have some sympathy with Cardinal Tobin's response. I would prefer that priests of the Archdiocese of Newark didn't have these sorts of stories to tell as well. But the fact is that CNA spoke to 7 different priests, all in active ministry. 6 of them are priests of the Archdiocese of Newark and in active ministry.
Seton Hall University is taking action, launching an independent investigation into its 2 seminaries. The school president writes, "Among the many disgraceful incidents that have shaken our collective consciousness, we at the university are particularly concerned with recent accusations against Theodore McCarrick, former Archbishop of Newark, and other priests of the Archdiocese." Pope Francis accepted McCarrick's resignation from the College of Cardinals and removed him from public ministry. That came after allegations McCarrick abused seminarians and minors. The Archdiocese of Newark now admits it knew of 3 allegations against the former cardinal. Mark?
Correspondent Jason Calvi, thank you. A church leader in Ireland hopes the Holy Father's meeting with abuse survivors will be a moment of healing.
I think it is important that it is seen as a sacred moment or a special moment, both for the survivors and also for Pope Francis. I expect that he will be in listening mode, as we have to be.
His comments came during a press conference at the World Meeting of Families. Participants are focusing on issues of marriage and family. Tracy Harkin joins us from Dublin. She's covering the meeting for the network. Tracy, reporters continue to ask church leaders about the sex abuse crisis. It's on the mind of Catholics, not only in Ireland, but also here in the U.S., Chile, and beyond. How are the bishops handling the controversy?
Well, today at the press conference, Mark, the question was asked again of the bishops, and really the message that's coming through from the Irish bishops and other bishops from around the world is that victims need to be at the very heart of our thoughts and our prayers. The Cardinal mentioned today that often it's been said recently that there's a darkness over the church, and he really emphasised the point that we need to be thinking more of the victims than the effects that this has on the church at this present time. very much it was welcomed the fact that Pope Francis is going to meet survivors of abuse during his 36-hour trip to Ireland. Archbishop Eamon Martin said, for example, today at the press conference that that was always going to happen, but for privacy reasons they don't disclose the actual details of that. Archbishop Martin also said that it's very understandable that these will be hard encounters because such trust has been lost, trust has been damaged, but very much again looking forward to the future, safeguards in place, good protocols in place, looking towards the future, Mark, but very much the whole idea of victims being at the heart of this.
Now, there are critics of the World Meeting of Families. They're holding a parallel meeting. They say they want to uphold the teachings of the Church, especially when it comes to marriage and sexuality. Many faithful Catholics are taking issue with the fact that Father James Martin is speaking at the official World Meeting of Families. That's because they see him as embracing homosexual persons without requiring them to live the teachings of the Church. What reaction has there been to his talk?
This talk was surrounded in controversy, Mark, as you say. He spoke today, it has to be said, to an absolutely packed house. There was a great interest in what he had to say. But yes, the main concern of faithful Catholics is that all this talk of welcome and building bridges is very much needed, and outreach is very much needed in our parish to all marginalised groups, including those Catholics with same-sex attraction. But the problem that faithful Catholics have with this is that what it doesn't say, and they feel that really what also needs to go hand in hand with that approach is also a very clear charitable teaching on God's plan for love and life and his plan for marriage, and church teaching on family and the true purpose of sexuality.
And another speaker, today's keynote speaker, is Cardinal Vincent Nichols of Westminster, England. He spoke about marriage preparation. What's his advice to couples preparing for marriage?
Oh, Vincent Nichols, Archbishop Vincent Nichols gave an absolutely beautiful talk today, Mark, very uplifting one again. He talked about the importance of marriage preparation for young couples coming to the Catholic Church to get married. He talked about the role that parishes should really play in terms of accompanying couples, that once the marriage happens, it's an event. It's not just a one-off event that the church needs to support. There needs to be ongoing accompaniment, and he said that we need to do that better and better as a church and in terms of the parish and the diocese that the young couples are living in. He also talked about his own experience of growing up in a family, the influence of his father and mother on him, and also the important role that religious can play and priests can play together with other couples in helping younger couples in that journey of marriage.
And finally, this weekend, Pope Francis will be visiting, and he's going to be visiting a very different Ireland than his predecessor, John Paul II, in 1979. How is the church in Ireland faring today?
Well, this is such a great world meeting. We're so blessed in the Irish Church to be hosting this event in Dublin. It's really re-energised the church. It's given visibility, Mark, I think, to the much good work that's happening on the ground, often hidden, the many apostolates, the prayer initiatives, the renewal ministries that's happening at the moment within the Irish Church. So yes, our numbers are smaller, but those Catholics are really well engaged, and that's something that has been very much encouraged over the last decade or so, in particular by the likes of our primate, Archbishop Eamon Martin, and other bishops, calling laity to take up their role in the Irish Church and work alongside our priests to take co-responsibility, if you like, for the mission of Christ and his church in our modern world in Ireland today.
We'll be paying attention to the Pope's words this weekend. Tracy Harkin, EWTN Ireland, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mark.
The Holy Father's visit to Ireland comes during a difficult time for the Church, but some Irish Catholics are hopeful.
I see a lot of new life amongst young people who have a deep committed faith, Catholic faith. Obviously they're very disappointed by what's been happening in the Church in the last few years, and particularly the whole abuse scandals. But I think people can see beyond that. That's failings of human beings, like we're all sinners.
The Holy Father will address the World Meeting of Families on Saturday and say Mass in Dublin on Sunday. Ireland is still recovering from its 2005 abuse scandal. And a bishop in southern England asked the Pope to meet with church leaders specifically about clergy sex abuse. Bishop Philip Egan says, quote, "Clerical sex abuse seems to be a worldwide phenomenon. These revelations fill me with deep sorrow and shame." He also says topics for the meeting would include support for celibacy and establishing accountability and supervision. In the wake of the clergy sex abuse crisis, many lay Catholics are calling bishops out. Matthew Schmitz, senior editor of First Things, recently wrote, "Upholding Catholic teaching on paper, but not in reality, has led to widespread corruption and contempt for authority. Preserving the peace has required a culture of lies. This is the culture that allowed men like McCarrick to flourish. One way or another, we must sweep it away." Joining us now is Matthew Schmitz, senior editor of First Things. Matthew, solving this crisis, easier said than done. How do we sweep away that culture of lies, like you say?
So the first thing to do, as many lay people and clergy have suggested, is to have a full forensic investigation of the McCarrick case, extending out from not just the Archdiocese of Washington, but out from America, because there would be connections to this case internationally. There are things that have been related to it in Rome. Some of our bishops have already called for that, and we need to have this investigation occur. What would that mean concretely? Ultimately, authority rests with the Pope, so he'll have to authorize it. It should have a papal legate who's able to do a canonical investigation with the help of competent lay people, detectives, forensic accountants, attorneys, people who are able to subpoena documents and depose witnesses.
And meanwhile, Chile is having a crisis of its own. All of the 31 Chilean bishops there offered their resignation after this sex abuse crisis broke there. Why haven't we seen that among American bishops, and should they come forward and offer their resignations now?
I'm somewhat resistant to the idea of having all the bishops offer their resignation in a way that ends up cloaking who's concretely responsible. And I think it's important to actually bring some sunlight in here and find who's concretely responsible. Once that's known, once the sins have actually been confessed, then penances can be assigned. And maybe that should be a collective penance. Maybe the blame really extends that far, but I think it'd be premature, and it would almost be an act of cover-up to have a resignation before we really know what occurred.
You also recently wrote that just as many bishops and priests rejected Pope Blessed Paul VI's teaching on contraception in Humanae Vitae, many bishops and priests have ignored the Vatican's call to prevent men with deep-seated homosexual tendencies, that's from the Vatican, from entering the priesthood. Is that what you meant when you said the clergy is upholding Catholic teaching on paper, but not in reality? And if that's the case, why is that happening?
Absolutely. People talk about a lavender mafia in the church, and that's a reference to the reality there are many gay priests. We've seen that in terms of AIDS death rates among Catholic clergy during the AIDS crisis and other things. But it can be, sometimes this discussion can become too conspiratorial. People talk as if there's a gay cabal. The reason that this problem has taken such hold in the priesthood, I think, is a broader collapse of adherence to the Church's moral teaching among all Catholics. So that connects to issues like contraception, it connects to issues like cohabitation, connects to issues like fornication. So there's been a broad collapse in the Church of willingness to really proclaim and live by the truth of Christian teaching in the face of the sexual revolution.
And turning to the laity now, what advice do you give to average lay Catholics during this moment of crisis?
Well, as a lay Catholic, I myself am seeking advice. I would say that we should realize that the Pope is the resource to whom we have to turn. We should appeal to him to intervene here. He's the one who's going to be able to authorize investigations, and we, I think, really have to turn to him and make our cries heard. So I'd say that, cry out to God and also to the justly ordained authorities and ask them for redress.
Okay, Matthew Schmitz, senior editor of First Things, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Mark.
Police in China are investigating sexual misconduct allegations against one of the country's best-known Buddhist monks. He denies the claim, but earlier this month resigned as head of the Buddhist Association. The main Muslim group in Indonesia criticizes the blasphemy conviction against a Buddhist woman. She was sentenced earlier this week to 18 months in prison after complaining the call to prayer at a nearby mosque was too loud. The association says her protest does not constitute hatred against the religion. The United States rejects an invitation to join Russian-led peace talks on Afghanistan. Top American diplomats don't believe the talks will stop the fighting between the Taliban and Afghan forces. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Mark. Officials here say, as a matter of principle, any efforts towards a peace settlement should be led by the Afghans, not the Russians. But Russia says the Taliban is on board, as well are Afghanistan's neighbors. It comes as Taliban forces escalate attacks across the country. Afghan forces in and around Kabul remain on high alert. Earlier this week, the Taliban fired rockets on the palace as President Ashraf Ghani was delivering a message on the Muslim holiday, Eid. Ghani saying if the insurgents think their nation will surrender, they should think again. As Afghan soldiers crack down on the Taliban in the eastern part of the country, Ghani's government is also rejecting September 4th peace talks in Moscow. A top official says the peace process should be Afghan-led. Despite the fighting, a U.S. commander in Kabul says there is a window of opportunity for peace right now.
We've also seen a clear progression in the Taliban's public statements, from their 14 February letter to the American people to their recent Eid al-Adha message, where Emir Hibatullah acknowledged for the first time that negotiations will, quote, ensure an end to the war.
The Taliban was unfazed by the U.S. and Afghan refusal to attend the Moscow meeting. The militant group will attend. Some Afghans claim the Russians are supplying weapons to Taliban fighters via Iran, a claim American officials have not disputed. Defense Secretary James Mattis says the Taliban is likely to keep up the violence ahead of October's parliamentary elections, but he says Western-backed Afghan defenses will not break.
They have not endeared themselves, obviously, to the population of Ghazni. They use terror. The reason they use bombs is because they can't win with ballots right now.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is planning to appoint a former U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan as a special envoy to deal with the Afghan-Taliban peace process. Pompeo says the U.S. is prepared to work with both parties to reach a peace agreement and has been working with the Afghan government to try and bring an end to the 17-year war.
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. ISIS releases a new audio message allegedly from its leader.
ويحز في نفس كل مسلم غيور على دينه وأمته.
It is reportedly the first recording of Abu al-Baghdadi in almost a year. He has been reportedly killed or wounded on a number of occasions. The speaker makes reference to Turkey's fight with the U.S. over American pastor Andrew Brunson. And Hawaii is feeling the effect of Hurricane Lane today as heavy bouts of rain reach the island. The storm is expected to continue its northwest turn. It is the most powerful storm to hit Hawaii since Hurricane Iniki in 1992. Shelters in Maui and Lanai are operating, and more are scheduled to open today. Coming up, a veteran Washington, D.C. journalist weighs in on a difficult week for the White House. Welcome back. I'm Mark Irons, in for Lauren Ashburn. Media are reporting the publisher of a national tabloid has been given immunity in the probe into whether President Trump paid hush money to two women. David Pecker is the executive in charge of the National Enquirer. Court papers connected to ex-Trump lawyer Michael Cohen's guilty plea earlier this week say the publisher offered to help the president squash negative stories during the 2016 campaign, especially over two women alleged to have affairs with the president before he was president. Joining us now is John Gizzi, White House correspondent for Newsmax. John, I see you in the White House briefing room all the time. Good to have you here in the studio.
Good to be back. Come and join us sometime in the briefing room.
So I want to ask, if David Pecker is given immunity, meaning he's free from prosecution, should the president be concerned about that?
Oh, I don't think there's any question about it. Remember, the Enquirer is the publication which I didn't take seriously for years, going back to when Carol Burnett's successful suit left them with a wound. But then that's in the past. More recently, they ended the career of Democratic vice presidential nominee John Edwards because of sexual misbehavior that they exposed. If they apply one standard to Democrat Edwards and another to Republican Donald Trump, meaning not reporting at all these allegations, then I'd have to say, and I hope you'll pardon this, that David Pecker picked a peck of pickled peppers.
That's a good way to put it. This week has been full of news. As we know, Michael Cohen's guilty plea. Paul Manafort, former short-time campaign manager.
5 months.
Correct. So guilty verdict in his case. How will these decisions all factor into the midterm elections?
Well, again, I talked to a pollster who worked in the Trump campaign in 2016, and anytime there would be a disruption or something in the press that was not favorable, you would have a group of voters and supporters leave. Within a period of 3 weeks, the pollster told me, they would return and they would never leave again, different groups leaving at different times. My guess is it will not affect the president's core support, whom he is doing everything he can to get to turn out this November, as he did in primaries, caucuses, and in the general election. And I think whatever happens with Mr. Cohen's deal or with Paul Manafort's convictions, and the president is correct, it has nothing to do with his campaign so far. He's still got 2 more trials to go to. I think he's fine on the political front.
Looking forward, if Democrats win control of Congress in November, how likely are they to bring forward impeachment? And is that something that really raises the stakes of these midterm elections, if you're saying that it won't really affect, Trump voters?
The chances are 3 in 10 they're going to do it, simply because impeachment is something in this day and age that voters in general are uncomfortable with. Bill Clinton discovered this, and he managed to turn threats of an impeachment, and indeed the actual impeachment, into gains for his party in the midterm elections of 1998. He reportedly told an aide every time it came up, "I feel like Sammy Sosa at the plate." So it is with President Trump. And I think wise Democratic heads know that it is not good to pursue this. Some of the younger, more hot-headed freshmen who come in will surely offer it. I don't think it'll see the light of day.
John Gizzi, White House correspondent for Newsmax. I'll see you in the briefing room.
Look forward to it. Thank you, Mark.
Up next, pilgrims in Ireland take important steps. And an update on the condition of a sick baby blessed 3 years ago by Pope Francis. Welcome back. I'm Mark Irons, in for Lauren Ashburn. An appeals court strikes down an Alabama law restricting abortion. The state sought to ban the most commonly used second trimester abortion. The 11th Circuit says the proposal is unconstitutional. Alabama's Attorney General says he is considering whether to appeal to the Supreme Court. The Archdiocese of Dublin issues a challenge to attendees at the World Meeting of Families. They are being invited to do a pilgrim walk. It's a visit to 7 churches in the city. Pilgrims receive a free passport and a stamp at each stop. 6 of the churches are Catholic, the 7th is Anglican. The Dublin Camino, as it's called, aims to make the World Meeting of Families accessible to everyone. And finally tonight, a baby girl with a brainstem tumor was kissed by Pope Francis in 2015 in Philadelphia. Now good health news follows. Gianna Mas Antonio, now age 4, has left hospice care. She's set to enter school in the fall, but it wasn't just meeting the Holy Father that helped. The girl also endured 15 surgeries and more than 1 year of chemotherapy, and her parents pray the rosary every day. Her mother calls Gianna our little miracle. The family began a foundation for the love of grace to raise money and hope for children with life-threatening diseases. For more on this story, including how the family says God helped them along the journey, visit the National Catholic Register at ncregister.com. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Mark Irons. We're back tomorrow night with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.